Alright, here is my transmission all taken apart. So I've got the shafts over here, and on here, your first gear is mounted permanently on this shaft, and then the other first gear on the other shaft is on the opposite shaft is all the way at the other end. Second gear is on the first one on the first shaft. Second gear here. Third gear is the two in the center here. Then this is fourth, fifth. So that was a little wonky to figure out so that I could order the correct gears. And you can see here that this is the new gear, old gear, new gear, old gear, new gear, old gear. Same here, here, and there. So I'm going to be replacing all of those. I've taken this off in the order they come in. I've replaced, or I've bought replacement parts for every single one of these bearings. These little roller bearings that go inside of the gears. And I've replaced all of the clips and these little washers that go in between the clips. I bought all new ones because they're cheap, and I'm going to replace all of them now and start putting this motor back together. Replaced the crank. I rebuilt the transmission shafts. I put all new bearings, all new clips, all new washers in the two transmission shafts here. I replaced all the bearings in the cases, all your main bearings. I replaced the bearing in my shift drum, and I replaced the shift drum. This one wasn't shifting great. I don't know if you can see that in there, but right in the tops of the corners, the coating that they put on this piece of metal was, can I get that in there? Worn off, and it was making it just a little bit catchy when it shifted. So I replaced that drum with the new drum, and I replaced the shafts. I put the shafts now into the case. I've greased the gasket to go around the surface there, and I greased the oil seals, and I replaced all the oil seals too, and I'm getting ready to put the half of my motor back on to the half here, and then I can start building the sides again and put it back in the bike. So let me just set this down and get back to it. The shift spacer here on the back, and screwed it in so that I can turn the shaft here and shift through the gears. There's first, here's neutral, second, third, fourth, fifth. So all my transmission assembly here seems to be good. Everything is shifting right. So now I'm ready to put the gasket on and the other half of the case here. So I've got my gasket surfaces. I greased them. Now I throw on my gasket. I'm going to need a little more grease to keep that thing in place. There we go. Now I can carefully grease these shafts. I can assemble the other side of my motor there. Now, here is the bolt diagram that I made when I took the bolts off. I drew the side of the motor, and then I put all the bolts in there for where they go. These are handy for figuring out where your bolts are going to go. They're also handy for doing your Loctite. It's Loctite 243. Now you can Loctite all your bolts. Okay. Now these are torqued to 10 Newton meters or 88 inch-pounds. There's our motor. And this part of the gasket you can just trim off this here, then you trim that off there. Remove. Now the shift mechanism is a bolt, a little bushing, this spring, and this roller bearing. This spring goes behind that surface right there. So we got to get this in here. Matched up like so. See how the spring is behind that flat right there. We will torque that to the 88 inch-pounds. So now we've got our spring tension from that spring there. We've got to pull this out of the way and remount this. So okay, here I've mounted the locking mechanism there. Now you have to, this is first gear, and this little half section here, that's neutral. So you have to align this to where that little half section is your neutral. And then this one's second, third, fourth, and fifth there. And so once you get this spring mechanism installed here, you can spin your drive shaft. That's first. It's first, and then you can shift this to neutral. Second, hold this here, spin the shaft. This is second. Third. There's third, fourth, and fifth. Right there, fifth. So our next thing is the shift shaft. It's this guy here. Alright, now this guy goes into here. So we put some grease on that just for the heck of it. There we go. Right, so that piece just slides. You pull this spring guy back here, and that slides right into place. Behind here, that's supposed to be right on the case there. See that right there? So this spring gets in between there. So that's good. Okay. Go. Now the Kickstarter shaft. There it is. Right, so installed the little catch on the bottom here for the little notch on this here, and I guess it goes like this. Loctite 243, and then screw it down. Alright, now I have to install this O-ring onto the shaft here. There we go. Then the spacer bushing with the chamfer side down against that O-ring. There. And then that fills the space here for the crank so you don't get blow by from your crankcase. Okay, I ran into a little hiccup there. I destroyed one of the Woodruff keys when I was trying to remove it out of the old shaft. You know, those things are like welded in there. So I bought a Woodruff key set. You can't buy one, you know, they make you buy a whole set. And none of them in there were this size and this thickness. So I grabbed a bigger one that was the right thickness, and I bench ground it to fit onto the groove there, so it's the right size. So now I can install the now we're going to mount the outer clutch hub and the stop disc. Okay. Then the inner clutch hub. And then we've got this little tab washer. Goes right over. There's a little slot for the down tab, and then the nut. Now I've got to tighten the inner clutch. I'm using a clutch spanner tool. This is the Tusk version. A little pressure. Like that. And I've got to tighten this screw 75 foot-pounds or 100 Newton meters. go. These also have spanner pins on the back. You can use this for other things too. This one, you have to remember, is threaded backwards. So if you're trying to loosen this bolt right now, make sure that it's righty loosey, lefty tighty. You have to have a gear jammer. And that's 110. It's 110 foot-pounds. There we go. Wow. What you shouldn't do with an impact like I'm doing here, these are 10 Newton meters or 88 inch-pounds. Those go into an aluminum thread, so they should not be over tightened or you can strip your clutch basket. Alright, now we're ready to button up the left side of the motor. Gasket. I'm going to grease the surface, light layer of grease before I put the gasket on. That way if you need to take it off you can, and it won't tear the gasket. Alright, so now I've got the clutch in, the kickstart daily is in, these are all torqued down, and I can put the cover on now. The power valve assembly is already assembled there, so we just have to line up this gear here with that one there. So I greased the torqued to 88 inch-pounds. Now the clutch cover. There we have it. I've got a Vertex piston, and now I've got to mount the roller rod bearing. Then I'm going to insert the wrist pin and the clips. I'm going to put the piston on, insert the other clip, and then I can install the newly refinished, look at that, newly refinished cylinder. They vapor cleaned it, and now it's going to make the rest of my motor look bad, but it looks fantastic. So I just got to get a little bit of oil on this. I'm going to put some two-stroke oil in there and down on that rod bearing, and then I can put it all together. Right, so we're inserting these little circlips. These things can be a bastard. You gotta get them in, and then you can use a little screwdriver to get into this slot and pry the circlip and then down where it's supposed to be, into the groove. So you get them in, kind of hold it with your thumb, and use this groove to kind of pry the circlip down into the groove. And wear a pair of safety glasses because these things come flying out of here. They go flying across the room sometimes. Alright, now I'm going to put the cylinder on. In my Wrench Rabbit kit, I got a number of cylinder gaskets. The one that I put on there is a 14 thousandths gasket. I got a 7 thousandths gasket, an 18 thousandths gasket, and a 29 thousandths gasket. And I don't know which one I should be using, and so I'm using one that's kind of in the middle. And I'm going to stick it on and then check the height of the piston with my gauge, my height gauge, and then I'll use a feeler underneath it, and then if I have to swap out the cylinder gasket to get the right height, I will. So now I just have to put the cylinder on, which I've pre-oiled the inside of the cylinder. I oiled my oil rings on there, installed the circlips, which was a little tricky, and now I just gotta squeeze these rings down, and then down. Ooh. I stuck it on backwards because I couldn't get my hand around the back side of the rings. Okay. Yes. Right there. Now when I check that with my gauge here, that is pretty dang close. So the 14 thousandths gasket looks like it's just a little, like about 7 thousandths too thick. So I'm going to remove the 7 thousandths gasket . So we'll try this thinner gasket, see if I can get that a little closer. Here. Right there. So it's just barely touching my gauge. And I haven't put the nuts on yet to hold it down. So I'm pretty sure that's going to do it right there. So the 7/1000 gasket gave me the perfect fit here. If this is coming too far into the dome, you'll get some overheating problems. And if you're too low off the dome, then you won't get full power. So you use a gauge. These don't have a dome, so they're flat. So this is basically just a flat gauge. But this one also has the space for your power valve. I'll show that later. Nice. I bought brand new nuts. And brand new head bolts and the brass washers too. Okay, I've assembled the power valve. It's a kind of a tricky setup. So you've got your gear plate back here. You line it up with your gears when you assemble it to the shaft. And then there's the second plate that has a washer behind it, and then your screw goes through it, and it has a counterboard spacer. There's a little spring in between here, and the little spring, the top of the long edge of the spring goes on top of this pin, and then you have to pull some spring tension to the bottom side of the spring to get it underneath this pin here. And I used a paint can opener that actually worked pretty well to grab it and pull it underneath that spring to add some spring tension to that there. And then that side's assembled. On the other side, you've got your stop plate and your gear plate with your stop plate, and then you got to set your stop distance. On my model gear, it's 47.5 millimeters. The gauge that I bought from Tusk is 48 millimeters, which is for a newer bike. So I had to go short of this gauge a little bit, but then you just set it all the way down, and then hook this underneath your power valve to your deck height, and it's supposed to be, on mine, 47.5. On a newer bike it's 48, and so I'm just a little bit short of that. So I've got mine set perfect. I've got the height of my piston set perfect. Now I can put a layer of silicone on this exhaust flange, and then mount it right up there with the spring with the spring bracket in the upper right and lower left hand corners of this flange. That's 7.4 foot-pounds. I'm using it inch-pounds. This is 88 inch-pounds. I think it's 10 Newton meters. And that's it. Power valve. Now I just have to check to see if we've got smooth operation, and we do. I put a little bit of grease on there on both sides. So now I'm going to pop on that little connector, and then there's a wire that goes in a hole. It's very difficult to see on the back here. Slides up in there, and then this pops over, and that keeps that from popping off. And there you have it. This gasket actually goes underneath this, so I had to pop this off so I could put the gasket. I've installed the two O-rings and the head, and I'm using brand new bolts with new crush washers. You should use new crush washers every time you take the head off. Now I'm going to torque these to 14 inch-pounds, or foot-pounds, sorry, and then I'm going to finish torque them to 21 foot-pounds. There's a reed cage, put in a new gasket. I cleaned up the reed cage with a wire cup wheel. Turned out, I mean the intake here with a wire cup wheel turned out pretty good. I put some grease inside of that oil seal, and now I'm going to take my new spacer with a new O-ring, slide that right into there, install the sprocket, put the snap ring. I gotta get some snap ring pliers. Installed the flywheel. The lock nut, or the lock washer, and the collar nut. And you torque to 44 foot-pounds, or 60 Newton meters. And I'm using the Tusk flywheel holder to hold this in place while I tighten it. Now I just have my water pump and power valve. I put medium Loctite on everything. Some things don't need it. I put it on there anyway. You don't have to tighten the bolts so much, so you don't have to worry about them coming loose. Okay, I replaced the rubber O-rings on the power valve seal and my water pump. I also replaced all the bolts. Okay, I just picked the motor up and put it into the bike here. I had a little trouble with the bearings in here. It moved some when I re-greased the bearings in there when I pulled the bolt out, and the bearings had moved a little bit, and so I had to bang them back some. Also, I've got the bike on a stand, but I needed to support the rear wheel, and so I had to custom make a tool. As you can see there, it is a little cardboard box with gray tape around it. That held the rear wheel perfectly so that I could get the motor in place, and I jimmied it in there, got it in between. It dropped right into here, no problem. Once I pulled up on it there, I was able to bang with the hammer the bolt back in, and now it's in the bike, no problem. It was excellent. I replaced both of the engine mount screws. I got new ones from KTM. I'm going to throw some Loctite on those, bolt this thing in place, throw the nut with some Loctite on it in here, and then we'll re-bolt up the side plate and put in the starter, hook up the chain, and throw on the body work, and we're done. the gasket behind my hydraulic clutch was broken, and they didn't give me one in my wrench rabbit kit, so I used some gasket material and I cut out a new one. Alright, here is the finished product. It's all put together. Got a new bolt kit. Everything is exactly in place. I filled it all up with oil and water. Let's see if it starts. Yes. That's what I'm talking about.